Morning. Sometimes when you're in the middle of things, you get a wake-up call, reminding you about what really matters. After a week of complex and important Brexit drama, the slaughter of Muslim worshippers in New Zealand was that kind of reminder. There is a lot of hatred burning its way through Western culture at the moment. It's been here for a long time, but up to now, we've mostly chosen not to notice. Well, no longer. Back at Westminster, meanwhile, Theresa May's mixture of threats and promises seems to be winning over Brexiteers. I'm joined by the man in the thick of the talks, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. And to talk about the aftermath of the Christchurch massacre, as well as Labour and Brexit, the Shadow Attorney General, Shami Chakrabarti. Plus the influential Tory MP who this weekend quit his local party, Nick Bowles, tells us why. And Frasier star Kelsey has been telling me about his return to the London stage and why, as a Trump-supporting Republican, he despairs of political debate right now.
There is a kind of hysteria about disagreement right now, which I think is unhealthy. I think if you take the opportunity to really listen to someone and let them make their points, logic will diffuse that, but logic's not particularly popular right now.
Reviewing the news, the BBC's man in Brussels, Adam Fleming, the former Labour advisor and comedian Ayesha Hazarika, and the Daily Mail's Amanda Platell. All of that coming up soon, but first, the headlines with Ben Thompson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. New Zealand's Prime Minister says her office received a document containing far-right views minutes before the shootings that killed 50 people in 2 mosques on Friday. From Christchurch, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes sent us this report.
In Christchurch on Sunday morning, the outpouring of grief and solidarity has continued unabated. Close to the mosque where the first attack took place on Friday, the flower tributes continue to grow. Many people overcome with emotion. In Wellington, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made her own emotional tribute at the city's biggest mosque. But amid all this grief, there is also anger. Prime Minister Ardern today confirmed her office did receive an email copy of the killer's political declaration just before the attacks took place.
I was one of more than 30 recipients of a manifesto that was mailed out 9 minutes before the attack took place. It did not include a location. It did not include specific details.
Back in Christchurch, a sports team has come to lay flowers. Their goalie is among the dead.
There will be some who say what happened here is horrific, but it is nothing to do with me. It is not my religion, it is not my community. But that is absolutely not the message being sent by the people of Christchurch.
We're all one people, we're all one race, we're all human beings. We love each other, we have to love each other, otherwise this sort of rubbish happens. We have to love each other.
This city's name will now forever be linked with Friday's attacks. But people here want the world to know it does not represent them, that they too are victims of this terrible crime. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Christchurch.
Theresa May has made a fresh appeal to MPs to unite as Democrats and patriots and support her Brexit deal. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, she warns the alternative would be a lengthy delay to leaving the EU or not leaving at all. The EU withdrawal agreement is due to be put before MPs in the Commons again this week. More than 30 flood warnings are in place across Britain following a day of heavy rain. One area in Carnarvonshire in Wales saw a month's worth of rain in just 24 hours. There was also disruption across large parts of northern England after train lines and roads were flooded. Wales rugby fans have been celebrating their nation's success after being crowned Grand Slam champions of the Six Nations for the 3rd time in 11 years. They beat last year's winners Ireland by 25 points to 7. That's all the news from me. The next news, though, on BBC One is at 10 to 1. Andrew, it's back to you.
Very many thanks, Ben. And now, for those of you who haven't made it down to the newsagents, the front pages as usual, and the Sunday Express really encapsulates Theresa May's message to Tory waverers. It's now or never on Brexit. She could have written that herself, virtually. The Sunday Telegraph picks up something she has written herself, her piece that you were just hearing about. May begs patriotic MPs to back deal. The Sunday Times here, back my Brexit, or we will never leave, says May. Rare unanimity on most of the front pages there about Brexit. The Observer has got a different take. The EU are wargaming, it says, for the fall of the May government, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. The Mail on Sunday believes that comic relief is basically a left-wing plot by the BBC, so there you go. I'm going to say nothing about that. And lots of papers have the same, more or less the same kind of front page, reflecting on Christchurch. There's the Sun on Sunday, hate will not win, and the little boy there, one of the victims, 3-year-old. And again, there's the Sunday Mirror, Muqad 3 ran for his life, but he had no chance. And I think we should start with that story, Ayesha. It has absolutely appalled everybody, of course. And one of the questions is, does it matter to us here? It's the other side of the world, but it has big implications for Muslims here, of which you're one. Absolutely.
I mean, it was such a grotesque incident. When I woke up to the news, I have to say, I was not that surprised. I have felt a great anxiety about something like this happening. I think anyone who is of the Muslim community has felt that Islamophobia has been rising. There's been sort of a boiling frog syndrome. It's been rising and rising and rising. There are all these tropes about how if you're Muslim, somehow you're predisposed to terrorism, or language like Muslims are invading countries. Well, as a Muslim, I tell you this, we do not come to invade your country. We come to make a better lives for ourselves, to look after you when you're ill, to feed you late night food, to drive your cabs, to run your corner shops. We come and we serve communities, yet we are demonised, dehumanised and now terrorised. And I'm afraid we all have to take responsibility for this. Media platforms, the mainstream media, commentators and politicians. I was appalled that a prime ministerial hopeful Boris Johnson made very insulting comments about Muslim women last year. There is a long gap between those kind of comments and what happened in Christchurch. I mean, it is different. And we also have to remember that the radicalisation of Islamists and the radicalisation of white extremists has been quite similar in some respects. It comes from the internet, it comes from, as it were, propagators of hate. The one thing I will say is if you speak to experts, the cues that leaders give are very, very influential. But you're right, social media has played a big part. Look, I don't think social media has created these bad feelings. There were always people in society that had these bad feelings, but now with social media they can find each other, they can form communities, they can intensify. And what's really interesting today, Reuters is reporting that the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is actually wanting to discuss the live streaming of this massacre on Facebook. And I'm afraid social media giants are going to have to face up to their responsibility. And I do also want to say that I think Jacinda Ardern has handled this with such humanity and empathy, and I think the Muslim community and the rest of the world has been very impressed with her reaction.
Amanda.
There is a problem with her, with this news that came out today, that she actually got this email and she dealt with it within 2 minutes, but there are a lot of questions being asked about how quickly she actually reacted to that. And, you know, she's been brilliant. She's been such a human face. She has. But
I don't know if that would have necessarily stopped what happened.
And she admitted they only have a tiny counterintelligence.
Okay, let's look about how the papers have handled this. There's been huge coverage in the papers, focusing not just on the victims and how it all happened, but also on the killer himself and those strange manifestos that he's picked up online and from France and elsewhere.
Well, it's interesting because his manifestos, this manifesto is a smorgasbord of a lot of things. But as you were saying, what's very interesting is there's often commonality. You know, extremism ends up sort of meeting in the middle. In the middle. And that's something that's very interesting. But it is worrying that he does cite, he's obviously travelled around Western democracies, and as you said in your intro, there is this growing hate in Western democracies, which he seems to have picked up and put together.
It's the same obsession with kind of almost Dark Ages or medieval history. He's obsessed by the Battle of Tours, when the French took on the Saracen invaders, and a lot of Islamists go on and on and on about the victories of Saladin. They both look back more than 1,000 years for their historical promptings.
Yeah, they do. I think they look back, they sort of pick and choose. It's sort of lots of ignorance building up. And they don't have a great sort of historical knowledge about what has happened. It's all this weird stuff from the past. It's these icons. And it's this very hardline anti-immigration rhetoric. It's very interesting that in his travels, he was, he was in countries like Hungary, and there's a huge kind of anti-immigrant,
Victor
Orban. So I'm afraid we're going to have to start joining up the dots.
And before we join up the dots, we're going to return to Brexit. However, Amanda Platell, lots of front pages, as I say, basically saying the same thing. Theresa May is grinding the opponents of her deal harder and harder and harder. She's telling them, if you don't vote for this, you're going to end up with no Brexit at all. The Chancellor's got billions of pounds to spend if the deal goes through, and they are falling one by one by one, aren't they?
It is an extraordinary week that we've had, and looking forward to next week. The number of times, Andrew, I've sat on your sofa in the last 18 months and have been briefed all over the weekend before I did it by ministers and cabinet ministers saying she'll be out before the end of the week. Well, I can say now that they're all saying she'll still be here at the end of the week. They think that she's got a good chance of getting a deal through. They think that she'll be still there by May and perhaps even Christmas. It seems as though she's managed to, I mean, this is, even though she did she wrote a piece for the Sunday Telegraph, it was extensively briefed everywhere. And she's just basically saying, you either back my deal or you lay open the trap that it will be delayed eternally. So first of all, 2 years.
And that threat is working,
and it's working. It's completely working. You've got, they say less polite things on the phone, but, ministers saying, we're going to hold our nose. The deal stinks. We've always thought it would stink. But what the alternative is so much worse. Okay. But there are conditions that they also want in this. These people who are going to now back Theresa May's deal, who would normally not have, they want to clear out of the cabinet. They want some of the traitors sacked. And
there's a suggestion in the Sunday Times. She says at one point in this that she's going to have a new sense of discipline in the cabinet.
Well, she has to exert her authority. I mean, David Davis has written in the Sunday Times as well, but this narrative goes through them where they're saying, OK, she can't sack everybody who voted against her because she'd have no one left. But they're very, very keen. And I'm afraid that one of your guests today, the Chancellor, is one of the names that the Brexiteers want sacked because they believe he's done a huge amount to block Brexit.
Well, we can talk about that with him later on. Adam, what's the view in Brussels of all of this? The Observer has got a leaked memo about the future of
Yeah, so the front page of the Observer, they're talking about this idea that Brussels is wargaming for the end of Theresa May's prime ministership. Now, there was a meeting of ambassadors on Monday morning last week where somebody raised this concept and used the phrase the post-May government. So there's been a bit of a conversation about it. I think wargaming it and having a big strategy for Mrs May being gone at a certain date, that is going too far. But on the inside of the Observer, we've got Dan Boffey, who was there in Strasbourg on Monday night, where I was at the press conference with Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, where they unveiled the reassurances that Theresa May had secured about the Irish backstop.
They're not enough reassurances.
And that was pretty clear. And it fell to me with the first question to say, Prime Minister, have you got a time limit to the backstop? Have you got an exit clause for the UK? And I got the prime ministerial death stare.
That's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary.
But then, of course, like everything in Brexit, there was this massive moment, midnight press conference in Strasbourg. A day later, gone, forgotten.
I know.
Nothing has
But
changed.
now she's back again. She's resurrected. She's resurrected her authority, and she could win this vote.
She could win the vote.
She could win it.
None of us know.
None of us know. I mean, just to feed in what Labour is planning to do, because if she is going to win this vote, she does actually need to get some Labour rebels to come over. Now, the Labour rebels might have voted against a second referendum, but I find it unlikely that they would prop her up, save her skin right now. But what Labour is saying very interestingly is that I've just been speaking to Peter Kyle over the weekend. The Labour Party will whip to support an amendment by Peter Kyle and Phil Wilson, which essentially says to the Prime Minister, we'll vote to get your deal through Parliament. Then you have to give it to the public for a final say, and then that confirms it and that ratifies it. Now, I know last week people felt that the second referendum died a death. There's going to be a big march this week, but it is interesting that Corbyn has now said that the Labour Party will whip to support this. And the Labour Party's been much tougher with its front benches than the Conservatives have.
You heard it here first, folks. The other big question, Adam Fleming, is what kind of extension the EU might give Theresa May if she goes back after losing again and says, I need another extension. I possibly can get it through. It depends what she says, I suppose.
Yeah, the problem the EU have is that Article 50 of the treaty, which sets the ground rules for this whole process, says it takes 2 years and then the departing member state and the other member states can agree to extend that process. That's it. It says nothing about duration, renewability, attachability of conditions. So that is what the 27 are grappling with at the moment. And they'll decide on Thursday.
We've had people like Donald Tusk suggesting that a 1 year or 2 year extension might be a good idea, clearly hoping that in that time Britain decides not to leave the EU at all. And we've got other people going for a short extension. But can I just ask about the European elections? Because that comes up quite soon. And if we extend even for a relatively short period, we might have the situation where Britain, having decided to leave the EU, having nothing to do with the European Parliament, is nonetheless obliged to elect MEPs. Very low turnout. It'd be very interesting to see what kind of people would then be returned to Strasbourg.
Well, and there's differing legal advice from the different EU institutions. So the Commission, the guardians of the treaties, the rule keepers, they say if the UK is in the EU on the 23rd of May, when we would have been having European Parliament elections, they'll have to take place. The European Council say, actually, you can have until the 1st of July because the new MEPs don't take up their seats until the 2nd of July. And then the European Parliament themselves say it doesn't matter if there's no UK MEPs at all, the Parliament can still function.
Utterly astonishing. Can I just ask, you spent a lot of time with Michel Barnier's team.
Chasing Michel Barnier.
I chased him down the street.
You've never managed to chase him onto the sofa here yet. What's his mood about all of this? Is he in despair?
Team Barnier were exceptionally depressed on Tuesday night when the second defeat of the vote went through. But they've dusted themselves off and now all the focus is on how will they make this extension work. And I think what leaders will do on Thursday when they're presented with this option is they will agree to the concept of an extension to Article 50, but it will be the UK to decide what they do with it. Is it to pass meaningful vote 3 or 4, or to have a referendum, a revocation, or a big rethink?
This is probably the least appropriate metaphor, but it reminds me a little bit of the Battle of Waterloo, all of this, and the Duke of Wellington. Hard pounding, gentlemen. Let's see who can pound the longest. Thank you all very much indeed. To the weather, cold, blustery and heavy rain. They're lovely this morning. If spring is listening, our appeal to is just pull your finger out and turn up. Over to Matt Taylor in the weather studio. Matt.
Hi there, Andrew. Well, I actually think spring is at long last listening, and let's be honest, we certainly need it after yesterday. Strong winds and scenes like this. Flooded river valleys in North Wales, for instance. Still some swollen rivers around at the moment, but today already a much better day. Lots of sunshine around. Some of you will stay dry throughout. Plenty of showers in the west at the moment. Some of those heavy with hail and thunder. A few of those will get their way eastwards. But as I said, for many of you, the day will be predominantly dry. Still a blustery day. Temperatures 7 to 11 degrees. But if you factor on the wind, it'll probably feel a bit colder than that. Not as strong as it was yesterday, but certainly across eastern Scotland, we could still gust in excess of 40, maybe 50 miles an hour for a few. Now, the winds continue to ease down through tonight. The showers also fade away for many. But later on, we start to see cloud increase through Northern Ireland. Some showers return. Here, though, temperatures drop initially and then climb through the night. But across Scotland, England and Wales, pretty cold night, widespread frost and some ice around into your Monday morning commute. But a much sunnier start to tomorrow UK-wide. Well, almost. Still cloudy in Northern Ireland. That'll come and go with outbreaks of rain through the day. And there will be some rain push its way into Western Scotland, Northwest England and Western Wales. But nowhere near as wet as it was during the last 24 hours. Brightest towards eastern areas. And the good news is, Andrew, spring is looking, because the rest of the week looking milder, except for some morning frost and fog. Certainly drier and less windy too. Back to you.
That's great, but we can't have Northern Ireland treated differently from the rest of the country. Now, Nick Boles, a famously well-plugged-in former skills minister, has become a real player in the complex Brexit skirmishes in Parliament. But his advocacy for a so-called softer Brexit, keeping us in a customs union and close to the single market, has infuriated his local Conservative Party, which he has now, this weekend, left. And he joins me now for his first interview since that decision to quit. Nick Boles, were you pushed?
No, I mean, a certain amount of pressure was applied. They wanted me to tell them now, 3 years before the next election is due, whether I wanted to be their candidate in that election. And the party chairman made clear to me I didn't need to tell them, I didn't need to make a decision for a year or two, but I just concluded that our relationship had reached a point where there was no point pretending that we could patch things up, and that we better just actually part company in a, I hope, reasonably amicable way, and then they can go and select a candidate of more to their liking for the next election.
Reasonably amicable, but your Vice President, Martin Hill, says, "This is very disappointing for us all. We have once again been betrayed by our parliamentary representative. Talk to the man and woman on the street, and they're also quite angry that their MP seems to be going back on what he promised to do at the general election. He signed up to the manifesto about coming out of the single market and the customs union, and he's right, isn't he?"
I signed up to the manifesto. I was in hospital at the time receiving chemotherapy, so I wasn't able to give it quite the attention perhaps that I should have done. But the truth is, I have voted for Theresa May's deal every time it has been offered, and I will vote for it again on Tuesday. The only thing, and in truth, the real area where I fell out with some members of my association, including Councillor Hill, was in my efforts to stop a no-deal Brexit. And obviously I was very much involved in this plan that reached its fruition last week to stop no-deal Brexit. Now, my view is that actually, as we're seeing this weekend, is going to make it more likely that Brexiters will vote for the Prime Minister's deal and that we actually do get Brexit in the way that Councillor Hill and others would like.
And yet, an awful lot of your constituents who voted to leave the EU would be perfectly happy with a no-deal Brexit.
An awful lot might be, but I represent 100,000 people in Parliament. I have roughly 500 members of my local association and, roughly 60 people on my executive. I'm afraid I'm going to claim the right to interpret what is in the best interests of the 100,000 people I represent. And I'm not going to be bossed around by a very small number of people with very ideological views.
Are you still a Conservative MP?
I'm exactly the same kind of Conservative as I've always been, a progressive,
carry
liberal
on the Tory
Conservative.
whip.
I've said that I'd like to go on taking the Conservative whip. I do think it's important when you stand for election on under a certain party's banner that you continue to do that, because that's ultimately what people vote for. They didn't vote for me. None of them had the first clue who I was. They voted for the Conservative Party, and I want to go on representing them. But I will be my own kind of Conservative, the one that I've always been, which is a progressive, liberal, modernising Conservative, not an ideological, reactionary Conservative.
Have you been told yet by the Tory authorities in Parliament you can stay as a Conservative, taking the Conservative whip?
Yes, I have, and they're going to transfer my membership to the National Party, so that I'll no longer be a member of my local association, but I will be able to receive the whip, and I'm meeting the Chief Whip at his request on Monday afternoon.
And this is presumably also why you're not going to join the independent group, because if you did that, you would regard yourself as having to stand for a by-election, having to re-stand for a by-election.
I mean, this is a very personal thing, and I don't want to make comments about other people's decisions, but yes, for myself, I would feel that I had ratted on my constituents because they voted for me as a Conservative. And in truth, I haven't fallen out with the Conservative Party overall.
Did you ever think about leaving it?
I did think about leaving it, and I did think about whether I should stand as an independent. But ultimately, I'm not ready to give up on the Conservative Party yet. And we've got a leadership election coming, and the progressive Conservatives, of which there are a great number in the Parliamentary Party, we need to start asserting ourselves. We need to start flexing our muscles. We need to start demanding a Conservative Party that actually responds to what we believe in and not just what members of the ERG believe in.
You remind me very slightly of Tom Watson on the other side. We're going to stay and fight. We're going to change the party from the inside. So you presumably think there are enough of your kind of Conservatives left inside the party and left inside Parliament to seize control back?
Well, I'm very much flattered by the comparison. I think what Tom Watson's doing inside Labour is exactly the right thing to do. And the truth is, if we don't like the idea of our two main parties becoming extreme, becoming ideological and being captured by activists, then we actually need to get organised and we need to start pushing for a more moderate, a more sensible, a more pragmatic approach. Tom's going to do it in the Labour Party. I wish him well. And I hope that with colleagues, the sorts of colleagues who've secured the results of last week, blocking no-deal Brexit on the 29th of March, we will organise now on a whole range of issues, some of which the Chancellor will be dealing with shortly in his spending review.
And we've been talking a lot already about a possible different kind of Brexit, a customs union-based one and all the rest of it. You have been talking, not to Tom Watson, but to the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, about that. Have you found some common agreement?
Yes, we've had one meeting, and he's invited us in, a group of us, I think, for a further meeting. I know, very strange days. Just to correct one point, I'm actually not arguing for a permanent customs union. That is the Labour position. I think that we need to go into a customs arrangement that lasts until we can get these new arrangements that everybody keeps on talking about. But the key point is I am arguing that we should stay in the single market. And I do think that that is essential, for all that I accept that it wasn't the Conservative manifesto commitment. If we can't get the Prime Minister's deal on Tuesday, we need to start negotiating with other parties for a single market-based deal called Common Market 2.0.
Everyone talks about compromise. Do you think that the Labour Party is prepared to compromise with people like you to get that kind of deal through?
Yes, I've had very constructive discussions with other Labour MPs, with senior members of the Shadow Cabinet, and obviously, as I say, with the Leader of the Opposition himself. And my sense is that they want to see a sensible, soft Brexit deal that is based on full membership of the single market and a customs arrangement that secures a frictionless trade and no border in the island of Ireland.
Nick Bowles, thanks very much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
Now, a quick look at what's coming up at Politics Live in the week ahead. Here's Joe Coburn.
Will it be third time lucky for the Prime Minister as Theresa May gears up to put her Brexit deal before MPs once again? Join me on Politics Live for another momentous week in British politics, starting tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two.
And jolly good it will be too. The Shadow Attorney General, Baroness Chakrabarti, is one of Jeremy Corbyn's key allies. Away from the Brexit debate, Labour's also been talking a lot about the dangers of rising Islamophobia. Following the horrifying killings in New Zealand, what are the lessons she thinks need to be learned here in Britain? Welcome, Shami Chakrabarti. Now, as I say, Islamophobia has been something that your party's talked about a lot, and this happened on the other side of the world. But in terms of the law and our approach here in Britain, what would a Labour government be doing that's not being done now?
Well, I think that this happened on the other side of the world, but as you and others have pointed out, Ayesha in particular, in the paper review, the world is shrinking and interconnected, and the internet is part of that shrinkage. My own colleague Tom Watson has been talking about the role that social media can play in bringing hateful people together. And I think that it's time to really think about whether the internet can be an ungoverned space. You know, once upon a time...
People have talked about it as the Wild West of the media world.
Well, quite. And, you know, in a sense, it's more like a new continent, but we don't leave new continents just to be regulated by the initial explorers. I think it's time that we, as Democrats, both nationally and, more importantly, internationally, start having a debate about how the internet is going to be democratically governed in a spirit of respecting human rights and the rule of law.
So in terms of what that might actually mean, I think Tom Watson and others have talked about a new regulator for these internet companies and to start to treat them like publishers. I
think there really is something in that. I mean, why should broadcast media and print media be subject to so much different standards than new media? I should say also, though, that mainstream media and indeed political actors like myself have a responsibility in relation to the tone of our discourse. I know there's been a lot of controversy about a Newsnight piece that went out on Friday, the day of the massacre, where an extreme far-right voice was left essentially unchallenged. And I think we all need to just, you know, no recrimination, but I do think we all need to reflect on editorial decisions that we make and also on the tone of our discourse about things like culture wars and invaders and immigration, this othering of minorities. It hasn't all been bleak, though. I think that... I'm sorry.
We were talking earlier on about the comparisons between some extreme Islamists and some on the far right, how they're groomed, how they're drawn into extremism and so on. Labour's been suspicious, I think is a fair word, about the Prevent programme of this government.
I think there have been aspects of the Prevent programme that have left too many British Muslims feeling othered and spied upon and so on. That doesn't mean that we don't want to prevent terrorism and extremism, but we need to think about how we do it.
There's been a 36% rise, I think, in far right groups being applied to Prevent. the programme. So it's now looking at both sides very much. Would you keep the Prevent programme by and large?
I think it needs to be reviewed and quite possibly reformed, because what you don't want is counterproductive anti-terrorism that makes whole minority communities feel othered, when actually they need to be protected and they need to be unified with everyone. An attack on one minority is an attack on all of us, and I think the New Zealand Prime Minister put that incredibly well.
Okay, let's turn to Brexit now, if we could. You may have heard Nick Bowles just now saying that he was having quite good talks with Jeremy Corbyn about some kind of customs union-based alternative version of Brexit. In your view, is there a majority in the House of Commons for a different Brexit that isn't Theresa May's Brexit?
I think we've got a much better chance without Mrs May's approach. And it's not just her deal, it's her whole approach, I'm afraid. We've got a government in chaos. We've got a divided country, a divided Conservative Party, a divided cabinet, a divided House of Commons. And what Jeremy's been trying to do is to use his convening space as leader of the opposition to bring people together and try and broker some kind of compromise. Because up and down the country, people are just in despair at the shambles of this government's approach to Brexit. And it's causing great anxiety, great insecurity, ultimately about people's jobs and the economy at a time when we are the most unequal country in Europe and poverty is on the increase.
We've also got a political system where everybody says, let's compromise. And then when you say, will you compromise? They go, no, not me, somebody else. So in that spirit, can you see Labour compromising on something like the free movement of people to allow a deal to be done across the floor of the House of Commons?
Definitely, we are trying to broker a compromise, but one that will protect people's jobs, the economy and services. And I think there is more appetite for a Labour-type framework than there is for Mrs May's approach. And her approach has been my deal, or her approach has been throughout my way or the highway. First she threatened people with a cliff edge, no deal, Brexit if they didn't back her deal. Now she's threatening the other wing of her party with no Brexit. It's her deal or the highway. That is not leadership. That is not leadership, that is not stoicism, that is hubris, and it is failing people in this country up and down the land. Whether they voted for Leave or Remain, this is no way to run a country.
She might yet get her deal through at the third or fourth time of asking. If she does, it will be partly because Labour MPs have voted for it because they're so horrified about the prospect of no deal.
Well, again,
what's your message to them?
I would say don't be scared into a bad deal for this country, because we can come together around a good deal for this country. And as I say, Jeremy has shown his character, which is one of gentleness and listening and compromise. You've seen those noises even coming from Conservatives like Nick Bowles. He has done more in a relatively short space of time to show leadership than Mrs May has done in the last couple of years combined.
Let's turn to another issue, and it's a live legal case, so we have to be very careful about this. Sure. But the Bloody Sunday murder case, the government has said that they are going to pay all the legal costs of the former soldier involved. As Shadow Attorney General, do you approve of that? I approve of anyone in this country who's accused of a serious crime getting full, complete, 5-star legal aid. It's not about wannabe prime ministers who are currently defence secretary sort of giving coded messages of support to one defendant or another. It's about saying anybody who's being charged with murder, which is the most serious offence in our law, should get the best possible defence, and it should be paid for by the state. You've just mentioned the Defence Secretary. He wants to go a bit further and change the law to prevent soldiers facing these kind of accusations in the future. I don't think we can do that if we believe in the rule of law. That's equality before the law for everyone. I think it would be a very dangerous precedent if we started granting blanket immunities to anybody in a particular role or profession. Politician, soldier, police officer, doctor. We are all lawyers. We're all subject to the rule of law. So yes to Rolls-Royce legal aid, but no to blanket immunities or time restrictions on the most serious offences, I think. OK, Shami Chakrabarti, thanks very much for talking to us today. As any true fan of the comedy series Frasier will know, its star Kelsey Grammer sings the show's closing number at the end of each episode. Well, Grammer is about to make a foray into London's West End in one of the quirkiest musicals of the past 50 years. He'll be singing the lead role in Man of La Mancha, a comic take on Cervantes' classic Don Quixote. Co-starring Nicholas Lyndhurst and soprano Danielle Denise, it's a tale of triumph over adversity, what isn't. I caught up with Kelsey during rehearsals.
This is my quest, to follow that star, to fight for the right, without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause.
This is one heck of a song, which you have to belt out night after night after night. Now, we know you sing a bit, but was that kind of slightly intimidating?
This one does require a certain serious mindset, because it needs to be respected. It's the kind of song that needs to be sung as though it's a famous song, and yet you need to put your sort of initial mark on it. And I think we're going to achieve that nicely.
I would say that all great musicals, and we've got Company on at the moment in London, the early Sondheim and so forth, they've got a moral of some kind. So what would you say the moral or the story is?
It's just don't give up. I guess it's to dream an impossible dream. That's its compelling feature, I suppose, which is we owe to Cervantes and his great novel. But the musical and the success of the musical, I think, sort of distills down to that one song.
To reach the unreachable star.
This is more about Cervantes than it is really about Don Quixote, the novel.
Yes, pleading his case through the story of, the idea that you still have to dream something impossible in the face of extraordinary odds and endure. There was a big price to pay by speaking truth to power back then.
Absolutely. You have been described as a tiny speck of red in the universal blue of Hollywood. You're a rare Republican. Yes. You've been open about your enthusiasm for Trump. And have you felt in any sense that's kind of damaged your career in that Democrat heartland of Hollywood?
Well, honestly, I like to think better of my peers than to think that they would hold that against me in terms of talent. I mean, you hire an actor, you don't hire his politics. But, there may be some people who have done that. But
so you're quite strong on the anti-abortion side, pro-gun and all the rest of it, and pro-Trump.
I'm pro-common sense, is what I'm for.
You see, over here, pro-gun and pro-common sense are often seen as different things.
Yes, well, I understand why, but of course the sort of the American psyche relies upon self-reliance, and a lot of that involves the right to defend life, limb, and property, and that's where the gun right thing comes in. And of course, it is the Second Amendment, so it's a part of it's in the DNA of our whole country. So.
Do you find people come at you in a semi-professional situation when you're talking about politics and so on? Because certainly here with Brexit, families, communities, everyone is arguing with everybody else all the time. And I get the sense in America it's very much the same way.
There is a kind of hysteria about disagreement right now, which I think is unhealthy. I think if you take the opportunity to really listen to someone and let them make their points, logic will diffuse that. But logic's not particularly popular right now.
Respect and empathy. You've said yourself you wish Britain would just get on with Brexit.
Well, I just thought it's time. Once you've made a decision, once the vote's done, it's time to sort of pull up your sleeves and get the work done. So we'll see. I don't know. Obviously, there are some people that they wish they had voted, so maybe they're going to vote again. And that's we have this issue in America too. It's sort of like, if you don't get the result you want, let's just keep voting and we'll see until we get it.
Well, in Brexit divided Britain and everywhere else around the world, you are in the corner of the room all the time as Fraser.
I took action, Russell, and you can too. Move, change, do something. If it's a mistake, do something else. Will you do that, Russell? Will you? Russell? I think we lost him.
No, we cut to the news 30 seconds ago.
As the great psych in phrase, the great shrink, do you think you've done anything to sort of help change attitudes to mental health around the world?
My goal when I first took the role as a radio psychiatrist was to actually make sure that he seemed fair, that he really did listen, and that he offered advice that was coming from a loving place. And if that's what the world of psychology has become, then I will tip my hat and say, well done.
Kelsey Grammer, it's been a privilege talking to you. Thanks so
Thank you
very much indeed.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Kelsey Grammer there, and Man from La Mancha is at the Coliseum in London's West End from the 26th of April until the 8th of June. The government's annual financial statement's normally a big moment for any chancellor, second only to the budget. But Philip Hammond himself acknowledged to MPs this week that there was more important business in front of them. Government spending and Brexit have now become hopelessly intertwined. To help untangle them, the Chancellor is with me now. Can we start by talking about New Zealand? The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, has said that the media companies, Facebook and the rest of them, have to own this and take ownership. Enough is enough. Do you think there needs to be a change in the law?
Well, the big media companies certainly have to do more. As the world becomes more and more digital, we have to find ways of ensuring that our digital environment is regulated as effectively and behaves with the same standards and norms that we would expect in the real world around us, and that clearly isn't happening at the moment.
Some members of your own party have been accused of Islamophobia. There is a sense that we haven't taken Islamophobia seriously enough in this country. Do you agree?
Well, I think we're very clear about there being no place in Britain at all for any kind of attacks or hatred based on race or ethnicity or religion, and that should be applicable across the board. We've been focused on certain kinds of violent terrorism, but we need to be clear that it can come from anywhere. And what we've seen this weekend is a stark reminder that violent terrorism comes from all sides of the political spectrum and all sides of the religious argument.
So in future, Tories who sneer at or mock abusively Muslims will be kicked out of the party?
Well, we will take a tough line with anybody who abuses anyone on the basis of their race or their religion. That is not acceptable in our society, and it's certainly not acceptable in our party.
Let's turn to the events of the last week. To a lot of people, they seem completely bonkers. George Freeman, who was a Conservative minister, said, "This week we've seen chaotic scenes in the House," hard to disagree with that, "collective responsibility breaking down. This can't go on. A technocratic, legal logjam in which cabinet responsibility is broken and government cannot get its business through is not government." Do we have a government?
Yes, we do. We have a very challenging situation in front of us, as you've just said to Kelsey, one that divides families and divides parties on views. But I think we are getting close to resolving this now, and we have to do that so that we can move on as a nation. And I set out on Wednesday the fundamental strength of our economy, the strength of our public finances and the opportunities that there are out there for Britain once we can put the Brexit question behind us.
On the absolutely crucial question of no deal, there was a 3-line government whip and 4 of your cabinet colleagues abstained. Can you ever remember anything like that happening before?
Well, look, this is an issue for the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip and the business managers. It was a complicated set of votes on Wednesday where we were all expecting a free vote on the main government motion, and then the government motion was amended so that we didn't get to the place we expected to be. But I think a line has been drawn under that now. The Prime Minister had a very clear discussion with the Cabinet on Thursday, most of which has been reported in the media.
She was very cross indeed, clearly.
But she was very firm that we have to get a grip on our discipline as a Cabinet in order to ensure that we can get the country through what is a very difficult process here.
Because some of the abstainers got the impression that you were going to abstain as well, but changed your mind at the last moment. Is that true?
Well, I've voted with the government. I've always voted with the government. I've been in...
but is it true that you intended to abstain and then changed your mind?
No, I didn't change my mind. I've been in Parliament for 22 years now, and I have always voted with my party line, with my party whip. I believe that loyalty and discipline is an important part of what we are as Conservatives.
And you didn't tell other people you were going to abstain?
No, I don't think so.
Don't think so?
Well, I don't think I said that to anybody, no.
Well, someone got the impression. Anyway, let's move on. Can I ask you, when are we going to leave the EU?
Well, if the Prime Minister's deal is able to muster a majority this week and get through, then we will need a short extension. It's now physically impossible to leave on the 29th of March, but we'd be able to leave very soon. I can't tell you whether it'll be April, May or June, but it would be very soon. But if we're unable to do that, if we cannot bring together a majority to support what in my view is a very good deal for Britain, then we will have to look at a longer extension, and we're in uncharted territory. I can't tell you how long it will be before we can find a way forward that commands a majority in Parliament and allows us to deliver the Brexit that we've promised to deliver.
Donald Tusk has talked about an extension for a year or more. Would that be acceptable to the government?
Well, I think it's very important to be clear that any extension would be for a maximum period, and if the withdrawal agreement were ratified at an earlier point, then we would leave at that point. So it's possible that the European Union will respond to us by saying, look, you haven't got a deal agreed in Parliament. It's clear that some of the processes that are being talked about as a way of resolving this impasse would take longer than 3 months, and therefore the only extension we're prepared to give you is an extension longer than 3 months, an extension that would require us in the UK to conduct European parliamentary elections.
And you can see the Conservative Party and the government being prepared to hold those European parliamentary elections, even though we're not going to be in the Parliament for very long.
Well, we're absolutely clear that this is not what we want to do. I don't think there's a single person in the House of Commons, and certainly not a single government in the European Union that wants to see the UK conducting European parliamentary elections. But we may have to do that if we cannot get this deal through this week.
Your department is producing a commemorative coin about leaving the EU, and it's got the 29th of March 2019 written on it. What are you going to do about that?
Well, it's not my department, it's the Royal Mint.
Royal Mint, but it's
I happen to be as well
I'm
the master of the Mint,
exactly.
as well as the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm not sure the answer to that question. I'm not sure whether those coins...
We can see this coin here, but it says there, 29th of March. So what happens?
Yeah, that's an image. I'm not sure whether the coins have been struck. I don't know.
Presumably they'll have to be melted down and you'll have to start all over again.
Well, or they'll become collector's pieces, Andrew. They were never going to be circulating coins. They were always collector's coins, of which the Royal Mint issues quite a number.
So what date would you like to see on that coin?
I'd like to see us get this deal through Parliament this week, then have a short extension to pass the necessary legislation and leave the EU quickly. I think that we need to start the healing process in the UK, and the sooner we leave with a good deal done, the sooner we will be able to start to bring together people from both sides of this argument and get on with building what we clearly have the potential for, a brighter future for Britain.
This week you've been sitting with the DUP. If the deal is going to get through, you clearly need the DUP to vote for it. What have they been asking for and what have you offered?
Well, the DUP, as I think you will have heard Nigel Dodds saying on Friday, is primarily concerned about the threat of divergence between the regime in Northern Ireland and the regime in Great Britain. The DUP are passionate unionists. I'm a passionate unionist myself, and I regard it as crucially important that we do not allow differences to grow up between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And we're looking for ways in which the government can reassure Northern Irish politicians about our clear intention to make sure that there are no such differences as we go forward, if the backstop ever had to come into force.
It's slightly odd that as the Chancellor you're involved in these conversations. Can you rule out that you haven't offered them more money in return for voting for the deal?
I don't see why it's odd at all. I am
you're Mr. Money.
senior member of the cabinet, and my predecessor, I think, would always have been involved in any significant discussions going on across government.
Let me ask the question again. Have you offered them any money in return for voting for the deal?
No, this isn't about money. It's about political assurance. Well, look, we are coming up to a spending review, and we will have to look. We will have to look at all budgets, including devolved block grant budgets in that spending review. Of course we will.
So it's not possible that you're going to give them extra money in that deal in return for voting for the deal?
Well, we haven't even started to look at it yet. We haven't started the spending review yet, but there will be a spending review. We've got an additional complexity in Northern Ireland, as you know. The House of Commons voted a budget through for Northern Ireland last week, and Northern Ireland's in very difficult circumstances because the civil service has not been able to take some quite difficult decisions that need taking. We hope that once we've got Brexit dealt with, we will be able to resume a power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland. And then, of course, we will need to look at the spending review in that context.
Almost everybody watching will conclude from that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has offered the DUP extra money in return for
No, that's not where the discussion has been at all. The discussion has been...
Can you rule it out?
The discussion has been around the how we are going to reassure them about our clear intention to avoid differences in regulatory approach growing up between Northern Ireland and GB, how we're going to reassure them that there won't be a border in the Irish Sea of any kind, even if we do have to go into the backstop. And of course, we all very much hope, and I very much expect, that we will never find ourselves in the position of needing to use the backstop.
That takes us back to the vote. Is there definitely going to be another meaningful vote this week, and is that the final chance?
I think the answer to that is no, not definitely. We will only bring the deal back if we are confident that enough of our colleagues and the DUP are prepared to support it so that we can get it through Parliament. I mean, we're not just going to keep presenting it if we haven't moved the dial. But what's happened since last Tuesday is that a significant number of colleagues, including some very prominent ones who've gone public, have changed their view on this and have decided that the alternatives are so unpalatable to them that they, on reflection, think that the Prime Minister's deal is the best way to deliver Brexit.
Are you there yet?
Not yet.
A little bit. So more colleagues to go, and it's going to depend on how many of the pins.
It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, and obviously we're talking to a lot of colleagues about what the way forward is. And clearly, if we don't get this deal through, we are almost certainly going to have to fight a European parliamentary election. Almost certainly going to have a longer extension, almost certainly not going to be able to gain access to the headroom, the fiscal headroom that I talked about in the spring statement.
So you've talked very frankly about having to compromise across the House of Commons to get an alternative deal through if this one falls. What would you yourself compromise on? Would you go nearer to a customs union, for instance? I'm talking about Philip Hammond here, Philip Hammond MP.
Well, I've always been sceptical about this customs union idea that the Labour Party has now taken up, because the deal that the Prime Minister has negotiated gives us almost all of the benefits of being in a customs union.
That deal's gone at this point.
But without being in a customs union, so that we also have the opportunity to pursue independent trade deals. We're not going to get...
That's gone. Nick Bowles, for instance, who was just sitting in the chair a little while ago, has got a slightly different version of a customs union. All I'm asking you, everyone talks about compromise. Where are you prepared to compromise to get an agreement if this deal falls?
Well, look, it's not about me, it's about the House of Commons.
You're an MP, it's about you.
Of course, but I'm 1/650th of the House of Commons. We are going to have to find, building on the structure of the deal we've got now, with the withdrawal agreement being sealed, I don't think that's going to be reopened, but looking at how we build the future partnership, looking at the process to get there, because some of the ideas being put forward by people in other parts of the House are about process rather than about outcome. And all of us are going to have to compromise. If we don't get the Prime Minister's deal through, we will have to build something which commands a majority across the House of Commons.
Which would be a slightly softer Brexit, by definition, more or less.
I think it's possible that that's the way that it would have to go, but it's possible that it will be a question about process rather than a question about content.
Your colleague David Lidington has suggested this might be done by so-called, it's yet more jargon, I'm afraid, indicative votes. So the House of Commons voting on one version of Brexit after another.
I think you'll find that David Lidington didn't use those words. I think they were Chukaramuna's words. But what David said on Thursday in the House of Commons is that we would have to find a way to allow the House of Commons to come to a majority view on something so that we can move forward. Because it's very clear that what the country wants and expects...
facilitate progress to allow the House of Commons to find a way through. But that must be a series of votes.
Yeah. And that's certainly one approach to doing it. But it's very clear to me that the mood in the country is that the House of Commons not only should, but must resolve this issue. And if we don't pass the Prime Minister's deal this week, then we're going to have to do that by having a very frank conversation with ourselves about what we do support, because the House of Commons has been very good so far at saying what it doesn't support, but it hasn't set out a positive way forward.
You've mentioned a couple of times the so-called fiscal headroom. This is £27 billion worth of money that you've said you can spend on public services if the deal goes through, but if it doesn't go through, you won't spend on public services, you'll be spending on emergency measures and so on.
Well, if we were to leave without a deal, we would undoubtedly need that fiscal headroom and some more to support the economy through what would be a very difficult period.
This sounds like quite brutal economic blackmail against the Brexiteers.
It's not economic blackmail, it's common sense. The Brexiteers, the hardliners themselves say that if we left with no deal, which some of them are prepared to contemplate, we would need to use fiscal and monetary stimulus to support the UK economy. So they're clear about that, and we would need to spend that money, but we would be spending it in very different ways. And what I've done since 2016 is operated what I've called a balanced approach, where we have enormously increased public spending. I've announced,
well, you say that. You've given us austerity. Up and down England, schools are closing on Friday afternoons because they can't afford to stay open. Will your spending review allow that to stop?
We put more money into schools
not nearly enough,
2017, and we've protected school spending in real terms per capita. But look, I've announced, since I became Chancellor in 2016, Andrew, I've announced £150 billion of additional public spending. And what I'm saying to my colleagues is that the economy is performing solidly, the public finances are performing very well. If we can put this cloud behind us, put the risk of a no-deal exit behind us, then we can prudently release some of that headroom and make a bit more funding available as we go into the spending review to support our public services.
Is it acceptable to you that so many schools are having to close early on a Friday because they can't afford to stay open, or indeed because we've had examples of head teachers having to clean toilets and serve in the canteen because there is nobody else to do it?
I don't want to see any schools closing early. We've put £1.3 billion of additional funding in to schools in 2017. We have now introduced a fair funding formula, which is ensuring that money is spread more fairly between schools. There is a very big difference between the funding that different schools in different areas get at the moment. That's not fair, and that's giving rise, I think, to a lot of the disquiet, a lot of the unhappiness that's being heard is because of the skewed distribution. We have to resolve that, and we are doing so through the fair funding formula, but it will take time.
One of your colleagues, Andrew Bridgen, is reported this morning as saying that he's been approached by the whip, saying that if it's the price of getting him to vote for the deal, the Prime Minister herself will announce her resignation. Have you heard anything like that?
No.
Another of your colleagues, Nicky Morgan, Tory MP, says they, and meaning people like you, are going to have to take a role in saying potentially to the Prime Minister, actually, things have changed significantly. We think you should think about your position, Prime Minister. Can you ever envisage yourself doing that?
Well, look, the Prime Minister is absolutely focused on getting her deal through Parliament. She's passionate about that because she passionately believes that this deal is the best exit for Britain from the European Union. But if we don't get it through, I'm sure she'll be equally committed to then ensuring a process that allows Parliament to find an alternative way forward.
And you know her very well. Do you think there's any circumstances in this process where she says, do you know what, I've realised I'm part of the problem, I'm going to step down? I think she's not that kind of person.
Well, she absolutely is a kind of person who will always do what she thinks is in the best interest of the country. She's a person with a very strong moral streak to everything she does, and she will always do, I'm sure, what she feels is in Britain's best interest.
But the question of who is or isn't Prime Minister is secondary at the moment to the question of whether this deal gets through. So that in those circumstances, if you thought it would help to get the deal through, to get it over the line, if she announced that she was going to go at a certain time, would you not have that conversation with her?
Well, the Prime Minister has already said to the Conservative Party that she will not lead the party into the next general election in 2022. So she's already made that clear.
Now, you may have heard in the paper review, some people are saying that your own position is now hanging by a thread, that she's very, very cross with the so-called soft Brexiteers on that wing of the party, and that if she gets this through, there is going to be a clear out of cabinet, there's going to be a big change, and that I'm afraid that your neck is first on the block.
Well, Andrew, I've heard that quite a number of times over the last 2 years and 9 months that I've been doing this job, and indeed the years that I've spent doing previous jobs. That's in the nature of being at the top of the slippery pole of politics that people are constantly predicting that you're about to fall off it.
Okay.
But look,
very
my focus, Andrew, is getting a Brexit done that's good for Britain.
And very, very, almost in one word, is the next vote the final chance for her deal, yes or no?
It's absolutely vital that we get it through next week, because otherwise it's the final chance to do this deal without having to have a long extension of the Article 50 period. I'm clear about that.
All right, Philip Hammond, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. That's all for this week. Thanks to all my guests. Next week, I have got a really interesting political guest. But just at the moment, I'm not entirely sure who it is. Goodbye.